The Hall of Echoes had not seen such a gathering in 300 years. Saris pressed her spine against the cold marble of the western pillar, her fingers trembling as she clutched the hood of her cloak tighter around her face. Thousands of wolves filled the ancient chamber, their voices rising and falling like the tide, their bodies packed so tightly that the heat of them fogged the towering windows. She should not have come. The thought pulsed through her with every labored beat of her heart. She was too weak for this, too visible. If anyone recognized her, if anyone questioned why the castle's reclusive healer had emerged from her chambers for the first time in months. But she had to see. Tonight, Kaelin would end everything. Her gaze found him on the raised dais at the far end of the hall, and her breath caught the way it always did. The Alpha King of Valenhart stood beneath the iron chandeliers like a statue carved from grief and granite. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, fell across a face that time had weathered but never softened. The hard line of his jaw, the broad shoulders that carried the weight of a kingdom, the amber eyes that had not held warmth in over 40 years, 43 years to be precise. That was how long ago his first mate had died. Saris knew the story as well as any wolf in the realm. The great love between Kaelin and his fated mate, Eris. The war that had torn through Valenhart when he was barely a century old. The night Eris had been slaughtered by enemy wolves while Kaelin fought on a distant battlefield, unable to reach her, unable to save her, arriving only in time to hold her broken body as she took her final breath. He had never recovered. The realm whispered that he had buried his heart in her grave, that the king who emerged from that tragedy was merely a shell, ruling with cold efficiency but feeling nothing at all. Saris knew better. She knew because she had felt him for the past 12 years, ever since the night of her 20th winter when the bond had ignited inside her chest like a torch being lit in an empty room. Her mate. The words still sent tremors through her soul. She had been a minor healer then, newly assigned to the castle's medical wing. He had passed her in the corridor without a glance, his attention fixed on some urgent matter of state, and she had nearly collapsed against the wall as recognition crashed through her. The bond had known what her mind could not yet accept. The Alpha King, still mourning a mate dead before Saris was even born, was her fated one. She had told no one. Who would believe her? Who would accept that fate had bound a common healer to a king who had sworn, publicly and repeatedly, that he would never take another mate? So Saris had waited. 12 years of watching him from shadows. 12 years of tending to his wounded warriors and pretending her hands did not ache to touch him instead. 12 years of feeling the bond pulse inside her chest, incomplete and starving, slowly draining the life from her body. Because that was the cruelty of an unaccepted bond. The one who recognized it first bore the weight of it alone. And if the other half never acknowledged the connection, that weight would eventually crush them. Saris was dying. She had hidden it well for the first decade. But the past 2 years had stripped the flesh from her bones and the color from her cheeks. Her healing magic, once vibrant and strong, had dimmed to a flicker. The other healers thought she suffered from some mysterious wasting illness. Only Saris knew the truth. She was fading because the man she loved refused to feel anything at all. And tonight, he would ensure she faded completely. Wolves of Valenhart. Kaelin's voice rang through the hall, deep and commanding, silencing the crowd instantly. I have called you here to witness an ending. Karis's nails bit into her palms. For 217 years I have ruled this kingdom. I have led you through wars and winters. I have watched generations rise and fall. His jaw tightened. But I have done so alone, and I will continue alone until my final breath. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karis saw the nobles of House Morvain exchange satisfied glances near the front of the hall. The council has urged me for decades to take a new mate, to produce an heir, to secure the bloodline. Kaylin's eyes swept across the assembly, cold as frozen amber. I have refused. I will always refuse. There will be no queen in Valenheart. No heir of my body. A soft gasp escaped Karis's lips, lost in the growing whispers of the crowd. Instead, Kaylin continued, I am naming my successor from outside my bloodline. The crown will pass to... He stopped. His words died mid-sentence as his gaze, scanning the hall with practiced detachment, suddenly locked onto the western pillar. Onto her. Saris felt the impact like a physical blow. The bond inside her chest, dormant for so long, roared to life with savage intensity. Heat flooded her body, her vision blurred. And across the hall, she watched the Alpha King's expression fracture. His nostrils flared, his pupils dilated. And for the first time in 43 years, something other than grief flickered in those amber eyes. The hall had gone deathly silent. Saris could not move, could not breathe. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to disappear back into the shadows where she had hidden for over a decade. But Kaylin's gaze held her pinned like a blade through the chest. He felt it. The realization crashed through her with devastating force. After all this time, after all her silent suffering, he finally felt the bond. And he looked terrified. My king? High Elder Corvain's reedy voice broke the spell. The ancient wolf stepped forward on the dais, his rheumy eyes darting between Kaylin and the crowd. You were announcing your successor. Kaylin did not respond. His chest heaved beneath his ceremonial blacks, his hands clenched at his sides. Karis watched him fight for control, watched the war between instincts and will play out across his features. Then his walls slammed back into place. A momentary distraction. His voice emerged flat. Dead. Nothing more. The words struck Saris like a fist to the chest. She staggered against the pillar, her hand flying to her chest where the bond screamed in protest. Nothing more. As I was saying. Kaylin tore his gaze away from her, addressing the crowd with brutal determination. The crown will pass to Lord Varric Morvain upon my death. His house has served Valenheart faithfully for generations. His bloodline is strong. Karis barely heard the rest. Blood roared in her ears. The bond inside her chest, briefly ignited with hope, began to collapse in on itself. He had felt her. He had recognized her. And he had chosen to reject her anyway. Across the hall, Lord Varric Morvain stepped forward to accept the honor, his silver hair gleaming, his smile barely concealing his triumph. Beside him, his daughter Seraphine watched the proceedings with calculating eyes. They had won. Saris understood now why House Morvain had spent decades opposing any mention of a new queen. Why they had subtly encouraged Kaylin's grief, had praised his loyalty to his dead mate as noble rather than self-destructive. They had been waiting for exactly this moment. A king without an heir, a throne that would fall into their hands, and they had nearly succeeded. Would have succeeded if Saris had stayed hidden in her chambers. But she had not stayed hidden, and Kaylin had seen her, had felt the bond, had made his choice with full knowledge of what he was destroying. Her. Saris watched him clasp forearms with Varric Morvain in the traditional gesture of succession. Watched him accept congratulations from nobles who had spent years manipulating him toward this outcome. Watched him smile, actually smile, as if he had not just condemned his true mate to death. The mark on her hip, the phantom claiming bite that had appeared the night the bond ignited, seared with sudden agony. Saris bit down on her cry of pain, but a small sound escaped her. Kaylin's head snapped toward her. For one heartbeat their eyes met again, and in his gaze, beneath the carefully constructed ice, she saw something that shattered her completely. Anguish. He knew exactly what he was doing to her, knew that his rejection would kill her. And he was choosing to let it happen anyway, because facing another bond, risking another loss, terrified him more than her death. She was not worth his fear. Garrus turned and fled. She pushed through the crowd blindly, ignoring the startled protests of wolves she jostled. Tears burned down her cheeks. The bond in her chest felt like it was being torn apart with heated claws. Behind her, she thought she heard someone call out. A voice, deep and desperate, crying a name she had never told him. But she did not stop. She could not stop. The servants' corridors were blessedly empty. Karis ran through them on legs that barely held her weight. One hand braced against the stone walls, the other pressed to the mark on her hip that had not stopped burning since the moment their eyes met. He knew her name. The thought circled through her mind like a vulture. She had never spoken to him directly, had never introduced herself in all those years of service. Yet when she fled, she could have sworn she heard him call for her. How did he know? It did not matter. None of it mattered anymore. Karis reached her small chamber in the healer's wing and began to pack with trembling hands. A few dresses, her mother's ring, the medicinal herbs she would need to slow the fading, to buy herself a few more months of painful existence. She paused at the window, looking out at the celebration bonfires being lit across the capital. The wolves of Valenhart were rejoicing. Their king had finally named a successor. The uncertainty that had plagued the realm for decades was resolved. None of them knew the price of that resolution. You cannot run from this. Karis spun, her heart seizing. Merrick, the king's first beta, stood in her doorway. His weathered face was grim, his amber eyes shadowed with something that looked almost like pity. I am not running, Karis said, her voice steadier than she felt. I am removing a distraction. You are his mate. The words hung between them, heavy and terrible. I am nothing to him. Karis turned back to her packing. He made that clear. He is a fool. Merrick stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He has been a fool for 43 years, but that does not change what you are to each other. What we are to each other is finished. Karis cinched her bag closed. He chose his grief over me. He chose House Morvain over me. He chose death over me. Her voice cracked. I will not stay to watch him celebrate that choice. Merrick caught her arm as she moved toward the door. If you leave, you will die. The fading will consume you within the year. If I stay, I will die anyway. Karis met his gaze without flinching. At least this way, I can do it with dignity. Far from here. Far from him. She pulled free of his grip and walked out the door. The servants' gate was unguarded, every wolf in the castle having gone to witness the ceremony. Sarah slipped through it like a ghost, her cloak pulled tight against the winter wind. She did not allow herself to look back at the obsidian keep. She did not allow herself to imagine Kaelin realizing she was gone. She simply walked into the darkness, each step taking her further from the mate who had chosen to let her die rather than risk loving her. Behind her, somewhere in the castle she had called home for over a decade, a howl split the night. It was a sound of such raw devastation that wolves across the capital stopped their celebrations to listen. A sound that spoke of loss and rage and terrible, terrible regret. Saris heard it. She kept walking. But she could not stop the tears that froze on her cheeks, or the traitorous part of her heart that whispered perhaps she should turn back. She did not turn back. And by morning, she had vanished from Valenhart entirely. 6 months later, the village of Thornhaven had grown accustomed to its strange new healer. Karis lived in a cottage at the edge of the Whisperwood, a small structure of weathered stone that the village elders had offered in exchange for her services. She had accepted without negotiation. She needed nothing more than a roof and solitude. The villagers called her Wren, a small, forgettable name for a woman who wished to be forgotten. She had chosen Thornhaven because it lay at the furthest edge of Valenhart's territory, 3 weeks' journey from the capital. The wolves here were simple folk, farmers, craftsmen, hunters, who cared nothing for court politics or royal succession. They asked no questions about her past. They did, however, whisper about her condition. Saris caught their pitying glances when she walked through the market square. She knew what they saw. A woman who had aged a decade in 6 months. Hollowed cheeks, brittle hair that had faded from rich chestnut to dull gray, hands that trembled when she mixed her tinctures. The fading was accelerating. She had hoped that distance from Kaelin would slow the bond's deterioration. Instead, it seemed to hunger more fiercely with each passing day, as if punishing her for fleeing. The mark on her hip had darkened from silver to deep burgundy. It pulsed with heat at unpredictable intervals, sometimes gentle, sometimes agonizing, and when the pain came, she would catch flickers of emotion that did not belong to her. Rage, despair, a loneliness so vast it threatened to swallow everything. Him. Even across the breadth of the kingdom, the incomplete bond continued to transmit fragments of his inner world. Saris hated that she could not block it out, hated even more that part of her treasured those fragments, hoarding them like a miser hoards gold. She was pathetic, but she was also determined to spend whatever time she had left doing something meaningful. So she delivered babies, and set broken bones and brewed remedies for winter coughs. She made herself useful. And every night, she lay in her narrow bed and felt the ghost of a mate who had chosen to let her die. The traders arrived on the first warm day of spring. Saris was grinding feverfew in her cottage when young Bram came running, his face flushed with excitement. "Mistress Wren, news from the capital." She kept her expression neutral despite the sudden lurch in her chest. "What news could possibly concern us here, child?" "The king." Bram's eyes were wide. "They say he has gone mad." Karis's pestle slipped from her fingers. "Mad?" she heard herself ask. Bram nodded vigorously. "The traders say he has torn apart the castle searching for something. He has dismissed his entire council. Lord Morvain has been arrested and his house placed under guard." The world tilted beneath Saris's feet. She gripped the table for support. "What is he searching for?" "No one knows. The traders say he barely sleeps. He has sent wolves to every corner of the realm, asking questions about someone, but he will not speak her name." Bram leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They say the kingdom is suffering. Crops have withered, livestock have sickened. The wolves feel something wrong in the bond with their alpha, but none can explain it." Saris knew. The incomplete mate bond was not merely destroying her, it was destroying him as well. And through him, it was poisoning the entire kingdom. "Is there more?" she managed. "Only that the king has offered a fortune for information. Any wolf who can help him find what he seeks will be rewarded beyond measure." Bram shrugged. "The traders think he has lost his mind to grief, that the anniversary of his old mate's death has finally broken him." But Saris knew the truth. This was not about Eris. This was about her. After Bram had gone, she stood motionless in her cottage, her mind reeling. 6 months of silence. 6 months of believing he had dismissed her as nothing. And now this. Had she been wrong? Had his rejection been something other than what it appeared? Her mark flared with sudden heat, and through the bond came a wave of desperate, searching need. He was looking for her. 3 days later, Merrick found her. Saris was returning from a birth in the village when she saw the figure waiting outside her cottage. Her heart stopped, then hammered painfully as she recognized the first beta's weathered face. "How did you find me?" she asked flatly. "I have been searching since the night you disappeared." Merrick's amber eyes swept over her diminished form, and something like grief flickered across his features. "The fading has progressed faster than I feared." "You came to watch me die?" "I came to bring you home." Saris laughed bitterly. "I have no home. The king made that abundantly clear." "The king," Merrick said carefully, "has not been himself for a very long time." Something in his tone made Saris pause. "What do you mean?" The beta glanced around, then gestured toward her cottage door. May we speak inside? What I have to tell you cannot be overheard. Against her better judgment, Saris led him into her small home. She did not offer him tea or a seat. She simply stood with her arms crossed, waiting. Merrick did not waste time with pleasantries. House Morvain has been poisoning Kaelin for over 40 years. The words landed like a hammer strike. What? Not enough to kill him. Just enough to dampen his emotions, to prevent him from forming new attachments. Merrick's jaw tightened. They have had a healer in their employ since before Eris died. That healer has been adding compounds to the king's wine, his food, and the candles in his chambers. Subtle things. Undetectable unless you know what to look for. Xeris's mind raced. The grief that never faded, the emotional numbness, the refusal to consider a new mate, all artificially maintained. The Morvains needed him isolated, needed him to believe that his inability to move forward was natural, a consequence of losing his first mate. Merrick's voice hardened. They have been grooming their bloodline to inherit the throne for 4 decades. Your appearance threatened everything. My appearance? A true mate bond cannot be suppressed indefinitely, not even by their poison. When Kaelin saw you at the ceremony, the bond broke through decades of chemical suppression. For a moment, he felt everything they had stolen from him. Merrick stepped closer. That is why he rejected you, Saris. Not because he chose grief over you. Because the poison was still in his system, and it twisted his recognition into terror. He felt the bond, but his mind could not process it correctly. The Morvains had conditioned him to associate new attachment with unbearable pain. Saris's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, her breath coming in short gasps. Then his rejection was the product of 40 years of manipulation, not his true will. Merrick knelt before her. 3 days after you fled, the compulsion to find you became so overwhelming that Kaelin finally submitted to examination by a healer outside Morvain influence. We discovered the traces of the poison within hours. He knows? He knows everything, and he has been tearing the kingdom apart trying to find you ever since. Merrick withdrew a folded letter from his coat. But there is more. We intercepted this 2 weeks ago. Karis took the paper with numb fingers. The seal bore the Morvain serpent. The message was brief. The false mate has been located. She will be eliminated before she can be returned to the capital. The bloodline must be secured. Assassins, Saris breathed. Already dispatched. Merrick's eyes were grim. I have been racing them here, praying I would arrive first. Saris, you must come with me. Kaelin is perhaps 2 days behind me, following the bond. But the Morvain killers could be here within hours. As if summoned by his words, a howl rose from the whisperwood. Then another, and another. Saris's mark exploded with searing pain, and through the bond came a surge of protective fury so intense it nearly knocked her unconscious. He had felt the threat. He was coming. The bond would pull him faster than any wolf could naturally travel, but even that might not be fast enough. Through her window, Saris watched dark shapes emerge from the tree line. Wolves, a dozen of them, moving toward her cottage with predatory purpose. The Morvains had found her first. The first wolf crashed through her door before Saris could draw breath. Merrick shifted instantly, his human form exploding into a massive gray wolf that intercepted the attacker mid-leap. They collided in a fury of snapping jaws and slashing claws, sending furniture splintering across the cottage floor. Run! Merrick's voice tore through her mind, the mental speech of wolves in their true form. The back window! But Karis could see through the shattered doorway. More wolves were circling the cottage, dark-furred assassins with the calculated movements of trained killers. There was no escape route they had not already covered. She was trapped. A second wolf broke through the side window, glass exploding inward. Merrick was still locked in combat with the first attacker, blood matting his fur. He could not reach her in time. The assassin lunged for her throat. Saris raised her hands instinctively, and the healing magic she had suppressed for months erupted from her palms. Golden light blazed through the cottage like captured sunlight. The attacking wolf yelped as the energy struck it, not wounding but repelling, throwing it backward through the ruined window with tremendous force. Saris stared at her hands in shock. Her magic had never manifested like this. Healing energy was gentle, nurturing, meant to knit flesh and soothe pain. It was not supposed to be a weapon, but the bond was changing her. The connection to an alpha king, even incomplete, had transformed her gifts into something fiercer. More wolves poured through the broken doorway. Merrick had dispatched his opponent but was bleeding heavily, barely able to stand. Karis positioned herself in front of him, her hands raised, golden light flickering between her fingers. "Stay back," she commanded. The assassins hesitated. They had expected a dying healer, weak and defenseless. They had not expected this. A slow clap echoed from the doorway. Saris's blood turned to ice as a woman stepped through the wreckage. She was beautiful in the cold way of mountain peaks, silver hair cascading over black leather armor, pale blue eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. Seraphine more vain. "How touching," Seraphine drawled. "The little healer has claws after all." She gestured lazily, and her wolves spread out, surrounding Saris completely. "My father underestimated you. He thought you would simply fade away in obscurity, but I knew better." "Your father is in chains," Saris said through gritted teeth. "Your house has fallen." "My father was a fool who moved too slowly. I will not make his mistakes." Seraphine's smile sharpened. "The king may have discovered our poison, but he cannot undo 40 years of damage overnight. His wolves are still weakened, his kingdom is still fractured. And once you are dead, the bond will shatter what remains of his sanity." She raised her hand, and Saris saw the glint of a blade, a slender dagger coated in something that shimmered with sickly iridescence. "Wolfsbane and moonshade," Seraphine explained pleasantly. "One cut is all it takes. Even your pretty magic cannot heal what this poison destroys." Karis's light flickered. Her strength was fading, the brief surge of power already draining what little reserves she had left. She could not fight them all, but she would not die cowering. "Then come and try," she whispered. Seraphine's arm drew back to throw, and the world exploded. The cottage wall disintegrated as something massive crashed through it. A wolf so large it seemed to fill the entire space, fur black as starless midnight, eyes blazing with amber fire that cast dancing shadows across the ruined room. Saris had never seen anything so terrifying, or so beautiful. Kalen had arrived. The Alpha King moved like death itself. His jaws closed around the nearest assassin before the wolf could react, crushing bone with a single savage bite. He flung the body aside and lunged for the next, his massive form a blur of lethal grace. Seraphine screamed orders at her remaining wolves, but terror had already broken their discipline. They scattered before their king's fury like leaves before a hurricane. Seraphine herself turned to flee. She made it 3 steps before Kalen's wolf form slammed into her, pinning her to the ground with one enormous paw. The poisoned dagger flew from her grip, skittering across the floor. "Call them off." His mental voice was a thunderclap of authority. "Now." Seraphine's eyes darted wildly, seeking escape. Finding none, she let out a sharp whistle. The remaining assassins melted back into the forest, dragging their wounded with them. Kalen held her pinned for a long moment, his amber eyes promising violence. Then, with visible effort, he stepped back and shifted. The wolf dissolved into man. Karis had watched Kalen from a distance for more than a decade. She had memorized every line of his face, every gesture, every expression. But she had never seen him like this, wild-eyed and breathing hard, his ceremonial composure shattered completely. He looked at her, and Saris watched the Alpha King of Valenhart fall to his knees. "You're alive." His voice cracked on the words. "I felt you fading. Every day I felt you slipping further away, and I could not find you. I could not—" He broke off, his hands reaching toward her but stopping just short of contact, as if he was afraid she might shatter, or afraid she might reject his touch, as he had rejected her. "Kaelin," she whispered. The sound of his name on her lips seemed to undo him. A shudder ran through his powerful frame, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "I am sorry. I am so sorry, Saris. What I did to you. What I let them do. You were poisoned." Her own voice emerged strange to her ears. "Merrick told me." "That is not an excuse." He finally looked up at her, and she saw that his amber eyes were bright with unshed tears. 40 years. They stole 40 years of my life, and I let them. Because it was easier to feel nothing than to risk feeling too much. His jaw tightened. "And then you appeared. And the bond burned through everything they had built, and I was so terrified that you rejected me." The words hung between them like a blade. "Yes." He did not flinch from the accusation. "I felt you, Saris. For one moment, I felt everything you were. Everything we could be. And I was so afraid of losing you the way I lost Eris, that I convinced myself pushing you away was protection." His hand finally touched her face, trembling fingers brushing her hollow cheek. "I have been a fool, a coward, and you have paid the price for my weakness." His thumb traced the shadows beneath her eyes. "Can you ever forgive me?" Karis wanted to rage at him, wanted to scream about the 12 years of silent longing, the 6 months of fading, the lifetime of love she had poured into a bond he had tried to deny. Instead, she leaned into his touch and let the tears fall. "I have been waiting for you," she said softly, "all this time. Even when I thought you had thrown me away. Even when I was dying. I never stopped." She could not finish. Kaelin pulled her into his arms. For a long moment they simply held each other. Saris pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent. Pine and wood smoke, and something wild that resonated with the deepest part of her soul. His arms wrapped around her with desperate gentleness, as if he could physically hold her together. The bond between them pulsed with warmth, incomplete still, but no longer starving. Finally, Kaelin pulled back just enough to look at her face. "You are fading." It was not a question. His fingers traced her grayed hair, her sharpened cheekbones, and the fragility of her wasted frame. "How long do you have?" Karis did not look away. "Weeks. Perhaps less." A sound escaped his throat, something between a growl and a sob. "I did this to you. The Morvains. I did this." His hands cupped her face with aching tenderness. "I should have fought harder against the poison. Should have questioned why I felt nothing for 40 years. Should have known that fate would not have bound us if I was truly meant to remain alone." His forehead pressed against hers. "You have been suffering since the moment the bond ignited, haven't you? 12 years of carrying this alone." Saris's breath hitched. "I thought you would never feel it. I thought I would die loving someone who would never even know my name." "I knew your name." His confession was barely audible. "From the first year. I found myself asking about the new healer in the medical wing, watching for you without understanding why. The bond was fighting the poison even then, trying to make me see." His voice broke. "I am so sorry it took me so long." "You're here now." Karis pulled back to meet his eyes. "That's what matters." "Is it enough?" The vulnerability in his question pierced her heart. "After everything I have done, everything I failed to do, is there anything left between us worth saving?" Saris thought about the years of silent longing, the months of agonized exile, The nights spent feeling his grief bleed through the bond while her own body slowly died. Then she thought about the howl she had heard as she fled the castle, the desperate searching that had torn his kingdom apart, the king on his knees before her, weeping, begging for forgiveness. "I spent 12 years loving you from a distance," she said quietly. "I would like the chance to love you up close." Kaelin made a broken sound and kissed her. It was not gentle. There was too much pain between them for gentleness, too much lost time, too much grief, too much desperate need finally finding its release. His mouth claimed hers with a ferocity that stole her breath, and Saris responded in kind, her fingers tangling in his silver-streaked hair. The bond surged between them like lightning, not complete, not yet, but awakening, unfurling like a flower finally given sunlight. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Kaelin's eyes were blazing gold. "I should complete the bond now," he said raggedly, "before you fade further. Before—" "No." He stilled, confusion and hurt flickering across his features. Saris touched his face gently. "Not here. Not with Seraphine's assassins still in these woods and the kingdom in chaos." She managed a small smile despite the exhaustion pulling at her. "I did not wait all these years to have our bonding interrupted by politics." A rough laugh escaped him. "You are going to be a troublesome queen." "Probably." She let him help her to her feet, swaying slightly as the world spun. "What happens now?" Kaelin's expression hardened. "Now we return to Valenheart. Seraphine will stand trial with her father, and every wolf in the realm will know that their true queen has been found." Behind them, Merrick had shifted back to human form and was binding Seraphine's hands with silver cord. The Morvain heir glared at Saris with murderous hatred. "This changes nothing," Seraphine spat. "She is half dead already. Even if you complete the bond, she will never survive the—" Kaelin moved so fast Saris barely saw it. One moment he stood beside her. The next, his hand was wrapped around Seraphine's throat. "Finish that sentence," he said softly, "and I will end your bloodline tonight." Seraphine's mouth snapped shut. Saris placed her hand on Kaelin's arm. "She's not worth it. Save your fury for the trial." For a long moment Kaelin did not move. Then slowly his grip loosened. "For you," he murmured. "Only for you." They traveled through the night, Saris cradled against Kaelin's chest on his black warhorse. His wolves formed a protective ring around them, 24 warriors who had accompanied him on the desperate race to reach her. Saris drifted in and out of consciousness. The fading had accelerated since the attack, her body burning through its final reserves. She could feel Kaelin's fear through the bond every time her eyes fluttered closed. "Stay with me," he murmured against her hair. "We are almost there. Just hold on." She tried. But the darkness was so tempting and she was so tired. Dawn broke as they crested the final hill overlooking Valenheart's capital. Saris forced her eyes open and felt her heart stutter. Smoke rose from the city. "No." Kaelin's arms tightened around her. "No, this cannot be." Merrick spurred his horse forward, returning minutes later with a face carved from stone. "Seraphine's brother Aldrich. He has seized the obsidian keep in our absence. He is claiming that the king has been enchanted by a witch and must be freed from her influence." "How many support him?" Kaelin demanded. "Perhaps a third of the noble houses. The rest are either loyal to you or waiting to see which way the wind blows." Merrick's jaw tightened. "He has taken hostages, the servants who remained faithful, the healers from the medical wing, anyone connected to Saris's time at the castle." Saris's blood ran cold. "Isolde, the head healer who trained me. She is among them. Aldrich has announced that if you attempt to retake the keep, he will execute them all." Kaelin's growl resonated through his entire body. Garrus felt his wolf straining against his control, demanding blood. "He thinks to use innocents as shields. Kaelin said quietly. He does not understand what he has awakened. We cannot risk their lives, Saris protested weakly. There must be another way. Kaelin looked down at her, his mate, gray and fading, barely clinging to life, and something in his expression shifted. There is, he said, but you will not like it. Tell me. Aldrich wants you. He believes that killing you will somehow reverse the damage to House Morvaine's position. If we offer him what he wants? No. Merrick's voice cut through like a blade. Absolutely not. But Saris understood. You want to use me as bait. Kaelin's eyes were anguished. I want you to do nothing of the sort. But I know you, Saris. I have watched you for 12 years, even when I did not understand why. You will not hide while innocents die in your name. He was right. She hated that he was right. Then we do this together, she said firmly. Whatever happens in there, we face it as one. Kaelin pressed his lips to her forehead. Together, he agreed. The great hall of the Obsidian Keep had become a prison. Saris entered on trembling legs, Kaelin's hand steady on her elbow. The hostages knelt in rows before the raised dais, 37 wolves with bound hands and terrified eyes. At their front, Isolde's silver head was bowed, blood crusting a wound on her temple. And on the throne that should have held a king, Aldrich Morvaine lounged with the arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. He was younger than Seraphine, his features sharp and cruel, his pale eyes gleaming with triumph as he watched them approach. The witch and her puppet, he called out mockingly. How touching that you came to surrender yourselves. I have come to offer an exchange. Saris's voice carried across the hall despite her weakness. Release the hostages. Take me in their place. Murmurs rippled through the Morvaine soldiers lining the walls. Aldrich's eyebrows rose. You would sacrifice yourself for servants? I would do what is right. Kara stepped forward, pulling away from Kaelin's steadying grip. Let them go, Aldrich. Your quarrel is with me, not with them. For a long moment, Aldrich studied her. Then a slow smile spread across his face. Very well. Guards, release the prisoners. He rose from the throne, drawing a sword that gleamed with the same sickly iridescence as his sister's dagger. But I think I will keep the king here as well. Watching his mate die should break whatever hold you have over him. The hostages were herded toward the doors, Isolde casting one desperate glance back at Saris. Then they were gone, and the great doors slammed shut. Karis stood alone before the dais, facing Aldrich and his 20 remaining soldiers. Kaelin's fury blazed through the bond. She felt him fighting the guards who had seized him the moment the exchange was made, heard his snarls of rage echo through the hall. Any last words? Aldrich raised his poisoned blade. Karis looked past him to where Kaelin struggled against his captors. Their eyes met, and through the bond, she felt him reaching for her, not with hands, but with something deeper. Something that had been building since the moment he first denied their connection. The incomplete bond. It was dying. She was dying. But it did not have to end this way. Complete it. Kaelin's voice resonated in her mind. Take what you need from me. All of it. Everything I am. It could kill you, she protested. I would rather die bonded to you than live another moment apart. Saris closed her eyes and opened herself to the bond completely. Power crashed into her like a tidal wave. Not just Kaelin's strength, but the strength of every wolf bound to him. The entire kingdom of Valenhart, channeled through their alpha king into the mate he had finally fully accepted. Her body ignited. Golden light exploded from her skin, so bright that Aldrich stumbled backward with a cry of shock. The fading that had ravaged her for months reversed in an instant, color flooding back into her cheeks, strength surging through her limbs, her magic roaring to heights she had never imagined. And beneath it all, something else stirred. Her wolf. Karis had never shifted. Common-born wolves often could not, their bloodlines too diluted to access their animal forms. But she was no longer common. She was bonded to an alpha king, and that bond had unlocked something that had always been waiting inside her. The transformation took her like a storm. Bones shifted, muscles reformed, fur the color of burnished gold erupted across her skin. When she opened her eyes again, she stood on 4 legs, her vision sharper, her senses exploding with information. She was magnificent. Aldrich's sword trembled in his grip. Impossible. Common wolves cannot. Karis lunged, her jaws closed around his sword arm before he could strike, her new strength crushing bone and steel together. He screamed, the poisoned blade clattering uselessly to the floor. Behind her, Kaelin had broken free of his captors. His black wolf form joined her golden one, and together they faced the Morvain soldiers. It was not a battle. It was a reckoning. Moonlight streamed through the windows of the royal chambers. Saris stood before the mirror, still marveling at her reflection. The fading had reversed completely. Her hair had returned to its rich chestnut, her cheeks had filled, her eyes gleamed with vitality. She looked like herself again. No, she looked better than herself. She looked like a queen. The door opened behind her, and Kaelin's reflection joined hers in the glass. "The council has confirmed it," he said quietly. "House Morvain is dissolved. Their lands have been distributed among the loyal houses. Aldrich and Seraphine will face execution at dawn." Xeris nodded slowly. She could not find it in herself to mourn them. Not after everything they had taken. "And the poison?" "The healers believe it will clear from my system within a few months. Already, I feel more than I have in 40 years. His hands settled on her shoulders, warm and steady. "I feel you." Karis turned to face him. "The bond saved me. If you had not opened yourself completely, I should have done it months ago. Years ago." His forehead pressed against hers. "I wasted so much time being afraid." "We both did." Karis's hands came up to cup his face. "I could have approached you. Could have told you what I felt instead of hiding in shadows. You were protecting yourself from rejection. I was protecting myself from hope." She smiled sadly. "I think we were both cowards. In our own ways." Kaelin's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. No more cowardice. No more hiding. From this moment forward, we face everything together. Everything? Everything. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "Saris, I have not said the words. I should have said them the moment I recognized you. I should have shouted them from the rooftops instead of running from them." "What words?" His hands framed her face with impossible tenderness. "I love you. I have loved you since before I knew your name. My wolf recognized you 12 years ago, even through the poison, even through my fear. And I will spend the rest of my existence making up for the time we lost." Tears spilled down Saris's cheeks. "I love you too. I have always loved you." Kaelin kissed her, softly this time, reverently, like a prayer made flesh. When they parted, his eyes had shifted to molten gold. "The bond must be completed properly," he murmured. "With the claiming bite. Will you accept me, Saris? Not just as your mate, but as your king, your partner, your home?" In answer, Saris tilted her head, baring her throat. Kaelin's teeth sank into the junction of her neck and shoulder. The completed bond exploded between them like a universe being born. Saris gasped as Kaelin's essence poured into her, his memories, his emotions, and his very soul intertwining with her own. She saw herself through his eyes, not a servant or a burden, but a miracle. The woman who had waited for him when anyone else would have given up. The queen who had faced death with her head held high. His heart, walking outside his body. And he saw himself through hers. Not a coward or a fool, but a man who had survived unimaginable trauma and manipulation with his capacity to love somehow intact. A king who had torn apart his own kingdom to find her, her mate, her home. When the claiming was complete, they held each other in the moonlight, both trembling with the force of what had passed between them. "My queen," Kaelin whispered against her hair. "My king," Karis answered. Outside, across the kingdom of Valenheart, wolves lifted their voices in a howl of celebration. The bond between alpha and mate resonated through every wolf in the realm, bringing with it a sense of completion that had been missing for over 40 years. Their king had finally found his heart. And in the chambers of the Obsidian Keep, wrapped in each other's arms, Kaelin and Saris began the rest of their lives together. It would not always be easy. There were wounds still healing, traumas still to be processed, a kingdom still recovering from decades of subtle poison. But they would face it all as they had promised. Together. Always together. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.